Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I am your host for Alivelihood New Adventures as We Age. On Alivelihood, I invite guests who are over age 50 who have started some new adventure in their lives. So today I'm going to introduce you to Alexandra Spingarn, who is an artist who has recently published and produced her own book based on her paintings. So we'll be hearing about that. So welcome.
Thank you.
And we're going to want to hear about the book and how it all came about. So I think you told me that when your granddaughter was born, Matilda,
Yes.
and she was living in London at the time, right?
And still does.
And still does,
In England.
that you wanted to find a way to kind of bring her home to Brookline with you.
That's right.
Yeah.
When my son, who grew up in Brookline, and his wife they used to visit every year with the baby. And when they came, and she was 3.5, she was painting in my studio. And we have an old music box that my children played with, where you wind it up and a little clown dances in the box. And she loved it. And so she was playing with the box and drawing. And after they left, I missed her so much, and I'm sure everyone who has grandchildren understands that pull when you miss them. And I decided if I painted her, I could bring her back to me, and I would have her with me. And so I started.
So that was your fantasy.
That was my fantasy. So I decided I wanted to make a series of paintings, and it was about childhood imagination, and I had her painting with the music box, and then have him come out of the box and interact with her as a child of 3 might fantasize about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I created a series of paintings about this. Mm-hmm. And then eventually I decided to make it into a book. But even before that, a year before that, the Newton Free Library chose me for...
And this is in Massachusetts.
In Newton, Massachusetts. It's the largest library in Massachusetts, too. And it's quite an incredible building. And they chose me for the month of December because they loved the theme of the clowns and the children and the music box, and they thought it would be a very, very cheerful topic for December, where you have Christmas and Hanukkah. And so I had the exhibit this past December. And I sent Matilda a book, and of course I sent them a couple of books, and she loved it. Mm-hmm. And then this past Easter, they came to visit, and we actually sat down together and read the book together, because she's just starting to read, so she could actually read the words. And it was really a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. So this is the first time you've really done a children's book, right?
The very first time. And as a young woman, I was trained as an artist, as a painter in New York at the Art Students League, where I worked for years with Harry Sternberg and Arnold Blanche. And then I went to Pratt Institute in New York. They had a Pratt Center for Contemporary Printmaking. Mm-hmm. This is all in the early 60s. And I worked there for 5 years, learning lithography, and then eventually I was a lithoprinter. Mm-hmm. And then moved to Boston.
We have 1 or 2 pictures, I think, that we can put up on the screen of your
early
days
lithographs.
Doing lithographs. Huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so eventually we moved there. That's an early lithograph. Mm-hmm. My work was much more surreal at that time than a children's subject. Yeah, yeah. But we moved to Boston, to Cambridge, and then Brookline. And during the years when my children were, in the middle years, I became a single parent, and I just devoted all my time to them. Mm-hmm. And then when they...
So are you saying that during those years you really were not producing much artwork?
More or less, I wasn't really painting. I started working at the museum school, trying to make lithographs there, and found the shop there rather limited. So then I went to Impressions, where I had a professional printer that I worked with for about 10 years, and made a series of lithographs with him. And in fact, that lithograph you had up there, which is called When Things of the Spirit Come First, was printed by Paul McGuire. That was a 2-color lithograph.
So he's a printer.
Yes, he's a professional litho printer, which I was when I was in my early mid-20s. But by the time he was printing for me, in other words, to be a professional printer, you have to be printing every day and be in very, very good shape. It's an enormous amount of work.
Is that the case for lithography in particular, or any kind of
Yes.
printing?
No. In lithography in particular is edition printing, where every print has to be identical, and it all has to be printed in one run. So like in maybe 3 days, 30 prints would be produced or less. And that's quite an athletic feat to roll the ink on the stones. And, you know, it's a lot of work.
So that's the part that the printer would do then?
That's what the printer does. And I was
so
a
you
printer.
created the image, but then the printer would do the mechanics of...
That's right. I gave it over to him because I was no longer as young as I was, or I was busy with children, and I couldn't put in the hours I did as a printer in New York.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about it because I think I might have told you that I just recently took a class on monoprinting.
Yeah, that's very different.
Right.
Because that's just one print, one take.
Yeah.
But lithoprinting historically is edition printing, where all the prints
I didn't realize they have to be identical.
Yes, and it's very different from even etching and aqua tinting, because you could do one print, put the plate away, and 5 years later you could do another print. But with lithography, it has to all be printed at once because it's on a stone, you know, a 300-400 pound stone that you print it, the edition is done, and then the stone is ground down for the next edition to be printed by someone else.
Oh, okay.
So you have to release those stones. You can't just save it for your one image.
Right.
And then also with lithography, you have one stone for each color. So if it's a 2-color print or a 4-color print, it's 4 stones. And all that has to be done, it all has to be identical. It all has to be in registration.
Okay.
It's a very special field.
Yeah.
And it's something I loved doing very much.
Is that something you imagine you'd get back to doing now?
Well, I'd love to make more images on stones, but I will never print my
You'll
own
never
stones
do the
again.
printing.
No, it's much too rigorous, and it's nothing I could do at this stage of my life. You know, but when I was a young woman, I did that, and I loved it.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
So just to come back to your book for a moment.
Yes.
What was it like for you to publish a book?
Well, it was
That
a lot of
a
fun.
new adventure for you, huh?
Yes, it was a lot of fun because, you know, I had spent time, when my kids went off to college, I went back to school and I got a degree. I got my undergraduate degree in classics, and then I went on and did a master's in art history. And I did a lot of studying of books. And so that was also on my mind, of the Renaissance images of early printing. So it was sort of fun. Also, this was done all by me on the computer. So I had to use...
You mean the writing, or?
Well, the writing and...
putting together the whole package.
Getting the images off of a disc and then placing them and deciding how it would be designed and how it would be the frontispiece, and all of it was, I designed it. I did the whole thing.
That's the beauty of self-publishing.
That's
right?
right.
That you have complete control over it.
And I even did the jacket covers and the front and the back. So it was like making a print in a way, because I was, you know, working again in producing a multiple. Because then these get printed, and then you have a box comes with 30 of them, and they're all identical, and I did it, and so in a way, it brought me back to something that I really love to do, which is making images, you know. And And making prints is very much like this,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Well,
in a different
interesting.
way. Yeah.
So what about the story? What was it like for you to
To write the story?
write a children's story? Because that's not something that you've done before, right?
That's right. But I've read a lot of children's books because I raised my own 2 sons. And as a child, my father used to bring me beautiful books when I lived in New York, and we used to read beautiful books, beautifully illustrated books. And it was frustrating because when I was reading to Matilda, there weren't so many great books. I mean,
Really?
yeah,
Great
very
children's
few
books?
artists today actually illustrate children's books. Children's books are made by professional children's illustrators, and most of them are rather commercial, I think, except for the classic ones like Maurice Sendak's books,
right, I was gonna
or
say, yeah.
Make Way for Ducklings, you know, the ones I love that I've given to Matilda and to her brother Orlando. And then I have another little grandson, Julian, in Brooklyn, and I get him books. But I go back to the books that were made many years ago.
Yeah. Now, Maurice Sendak, when did he write those books that we probably all read
Yeah,
to our children?
where the
wild things are,
and all
yeah.
that was all in the no, when our kids were babies, like in the early 70s. Those books came out, I believe.
Now, did he illustrate that book?
I think he did. I mean, I may be
thought he
wrong, but I'm pretty sure he wrote them and illustrated them. I mean, that was his gift. He was very talented. He was a wonderful illustrator.
Yeah. So, do you expect you're going to do another children's book?
Well, I would like to. In fact, I was thinking of maybe doing another, some kind of new story for my little Julian, he loves playing with trains.
So he's the son of your
He's the
other
son of my. He's the little son of my son Jason, who lives in Brooklyn, New York. He's married to Sabrina, who's an artist, and I'd love to do something about him. He's very bright, and he's a beautiful child, and I think it would be interesting to do something about him.
Yeah.
And I'm also interested now in painting because I'm beginning to think about painting portraits of people. I've gotten interested in that, and
That's not something that you did in the past?
no, I never really did very much of that, and it's something I sort of like to do while I still can, you know, while I still have the dexterity in my hands. I mean, you know, I'm going to be 70 next year, so I mean, in half a year, and I know from my friends who are now in their 80s that you don't keep that dexterity forever. The arthritis and all kinds of problems can make it very difficult to continue. So I want to do as much as I can now, you know. And
So
sort of a good
what would you
feeling.
say has been the subjects that you have painted in the past?
Well, as a young person, my teacher, Harry Sternberg, very much was a message teacher, and this was at the Art Students League. And he would say to us, not what you are painting, but why you are painting. What is it that you want to say? What are you trying to convey? And he would send us all over New York, the city, go on the subways, go in the parks, go everywhere, and draw everything in sketchbooks. Draw everything you see, because what are you interested in? What is it you are trying to say about the world? You know, that was, he was a social realist himself in the 30s and 40s, and he was a wonderful painter. And that was how I was trained to behave, you know, to behave as an artist. So I became very involved with saying, you know, as a young person, saying not only about, I loved painting mothers and children, and the children and mothers weren't always the happiest mothers and children, because I was also very message, you know, I was trying to show the downside of motherhood as well as the upside.
Oh, okay, but those were not really portraits of particular people.
No, no, no.
It
They
was
were more
the
from
message.
imagination. You know, it was more message of trying to show the human condition, the human condition of the city, of the bums on the subway, of all the the downside of the city as well as the upside of the city. I did lots of paintings of shops in Greenwich Village, of fish stores, of you know, old ladies on the subway with all their bags and all kinds of stuff like that. And I sold many, many paintings. I showed in Provincetown for over 17 years at a gallery, the Paul Kessler Gallery. And, you know, I had quite a career as a young artist.
When you say young artist, you mean
In,
20s and 30s?
Yeah, no. By the time, when I moved to Boston, I was 26. So it was all before I was 26.
Oh, a really
I had
young artist.
Yeah, I had my first show when I was 19.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was married at 23, almost 23, 22 and a half. So this all happened to me very, very young.
Oh. You know, I wrote a book a number of years ago now called Women Who Could and Did. And I interviewed women, some of them were artists, they were all over age 65.
Yeah.
And I interviewed an artist named Maud Morgan.
Oh, yes, I know.
Did you know her?
Yes.
Yeah. And of course she was painting into her 90s, I
Yes,
think.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Well, Titian made one of his greatest paintings, which is in Venice, when he was 98 years old. And it was a self-portrait. So many great artists did live to be very old.
right. Yeah. And of course a lot of people start doing artwork when they're
older.
in their older years.
That's
so
true.
I started
Yeah.
doing artwork maybe about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Which, you know, of course, I come from a very different perspective from you, who's been
Yeah.
trained as an artist and
Yeah.
practiced for so many years.
But, well, what I did was I had this passion when I was very young. Like when I was 17, I graduated from high school, and I really wanted to be a painter. And, of course, it was in the early 60s, in 61, when so many artists and young people were rebelling against the very conservative 50s. And so I, in many ways, rejected my parent. My father was a physician in Manhattan and came from a very academic family. They all went to Columbia University, and I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to be a painter, which was, you know, which was typical of that time.
But not so acceptable in your family?
No, well, my parents really loved the arts, and
So they
you know,
exposed you to the arts a lot, you
very
said.
much. And as a child, I studied ballet for many, many years, and I didn't study painting, but I did a lot of painting on my own, and I was sort of the class artist in elementary school and in high school. I then started to go to the Art Students League and study painting formally. And I went to Woodstock for 2 summers and spent 4 months up there painting at the Art Students League. And so I had a lot of exposure to the arts. But no, the point I wanted to make is that I discovered academics in my 50s when I went back to school and went to Harvard.
Right.
Whereas in my teens and early 20s, I just
You weren't interested in
I went
that,
to
really?
I went to the new school at night and took a few courses, but I couldn't handle all the academic work, the math and science and language that was required of you in college. However,
But once you went back to school in your 50s,
I had to
it was
do it.
different?
I had to do language. I had to do math, statistics.
Did you find it was more comprehensible for you to do it when you were older?
I think it was. I was more ready to sit down and concentrate and really do it. And I, when I did all my liberal arts courses in literature and classics and history, I found I could get A's. I was very excited to see that I had what it took, you know, to do well. I graduated with honors. So I was very proud of myself that I could.
So are you saying that during your 20s, 30s, 40s, you didn't see yourself as being much of an
That's right.
academically inclined
That's right.
person, huh?
Yeah, and also, don't forget, well, in my late 30s and 40s, I was a single parent, and I was very preoccupied with the education of my children. But I became my son Jason's Latin tutor.
Oh.
When he was at Park School, he went there in 6th grade, and he did 2 years of Latin in 1 year. And every morning, I was his Latin coach, his Latin tutor. And by doing that, I said, gee, I'd like to learn this. I'd like to learn about early Rome and Roman architecture. And I'd
So you
love to
mean
learn.
you hadn't really studied Latin?
I had never gone to college. I didn't study, early civilizations. I really didn't know that much about ancient Greece and all the art of ancient Greece. And
So your children
got me
really
excited.
got you excited about learning, huh?
That's right. And by parenting them and seeing their education, it really got me very excited about going back to school and wishing I had their advantages. Because I went to a public school in New York where I didn't have the opportunities to learn languages as they did.
Well, and I think they teach languages differently now
Yes, they do.
than when you and I were in school.
And earlier, so they learn it. And my kids both went to Hebrew school, so they were learning Hebrew in 4th grade and 5th grade and 6th grade. And it helped develop their brains and help them academically, I think. It was through parenting, I think I found a lot more self-confidence than I had as a young adult, where my parents were very preoccupied with the medical practice, and my brother
Was your
and
mother
I,
also involved in the medical practice?
she ran it. She was the medical administrator, basically, and she
And
ran
you
the
told
corporation.
me your mother is, 100 years old?
My mother will be 100 years old December 8th, and she moved up here when she
Still
was
cooking,
90.
huh?
Well, she's not cooking.
But I mean cooking.
She's still living, yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
she is living in senior housing at Spring House in Jamaica Plain, and been very, very happy there now for 10 years. So I'm very proud of her, and I've spent a lot of time helping her, but she's helped me a great deal. She's taught me a great deal about what it's like to get older and how to live with discipline.
How to age gracefully, huh?
That's right. That's right. So it's been a good life.
And it's still going, huh?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got all these generations that you're involved with, huh?
That's true.
Your grandchildren and your children.
And my
Your
mother.
mother. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and my peers, my friends who are some older than me, some younger than me. But I think that this is the best time of life for me, absolutely, because I think for me, adolescence was very, very traumatic, very difficult.
In what way?
I don't know why, but it was very difficult for me.
Even though you were practicing your artwork at
Yes,
that time?
but I think adolescence is turbulent for young people. Some young people, some depends. I mean, my children didn't have a difficult adolescence, but I did. And as I got older, my life became much more ordered and I became much happier. And I'd say this period of my 60s was probably the happiest time of my life. I mean,
What do you think made it the happiest time in your life?
well, I've seen my children grow up to be fine members of society, both doing very well. I now see grandchildren who are beautiful and growing. So it's an affirmation or a reaffirmation of all the work I did 40 years ago when I gave birth to them and took care of them. And I see my mother, I'm taking care of her, and I see how she's thriving and doing so well here. So it makes me feel very good that I've been able to accomplish all this.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons that I decided to do this television show,
Yeah.
because I think we have a different perspective, a lot of us, about aging, different from, maybe our parents or certainly our grandparents' generation, because people are living longer and
That's true.
more healthily,
Yes.
more active, and starting new things. So just as you're here today talking about your book and having, just embarked on this project of putting it all together yourself,
Yes.
which isn't something probably that our parents would have been able to do. Of course, we didn't have computers then.
That's true. It would have
but-
been much more difficult.
Yeah.
Without computers, I would have
course.
had to go to a printer, I would have had to go to a publisher and convince them that this was worth making a book of. And I also would have had to have a photographer take all the pictures for me. And I mean, years ago, you'd have to have slides made of all your paintings. And it was much more complicated to show your work.
Much more cumbersome. Yep.
Yeah, so computers have made it much easier for us, for everyone. Yeah.
So you say that you're interested in maybe starting to do portraits of people.
Yes.
Say more about that.
Well, I'm fascinated now more with the human face and the character in people, and I would like to be able to convey that, because, I've spent years now, more than 10 years, studying Renaissance art and the whole history of art, and so many great artists have this incredible facility of capturing the essence of a person. And I would like to try to do that. I mean, while I still have my hands that work,
Your agility.
my agility, I would like to try to capture that. I mean, I'd love to make I'd love to do a painting of my mother at the age she is. And maybe some of her friends. And
Now, would she be willing to sit for you, do you think?
Sure, she would love it. No, I would just do maybe a few sketches, maybe some photographs, and I mean, I'm around her a lot, so it's in my mind, It would be very interesting to do that.
Right. Now, so many great artists have done some wonderful self-portraits. Is that something that you could see yourself doing?
Maybe. I mean, when I was younger, I did more, not exactly self-portraits, but a lot of the young women I painted looked a little bit like me, which I think artists tend to do. They know their own faces so well, so they repeat them. I'm not that interested in actually doing a real self-portrait of myself, but maybe I will. But lately I've been doing these pictures of my grandchildren and of my daughter-in-law, and I'd like to maybe do. Someone said something to me, how come I don't do any paintings of men? But the clown, Pierrot, is a man.
Oh, that's a male figure.
A male figure, although he is a clown. But I would like to maybe try to attempt that, too. I mean, when I was in my earlier years, I did a lot of pictures of men, too. So it's just recently I haven't been doing that, but I'd like to do some of that.
Yeah. Okay, so before we wrap up in a minute, I just want to make sure that people know how they might get your book.
Oh, yes.
So,
Well, first of all, the people who printed it and published it for me, it's called Blurb, BLURB.com. So you can always go to them and buy the book. Or you can go to Amazon.com, and then I have a shop on Etsy, ETSY.com, with my paintings and the book and drawings. And then locally, the Children's Bookstore has it, and the Harvard Bookstore has it, and also the Brookline Booksmith.
okay, locally around Brookline, Boston
Right, in Brookline
area.
and Cambridge. And then in New York, in Brooklyn, it's at a bookstore there where my son lives. So.
Okay, and what about at your website?
Oh, and my website is alexandraspingarn.com. You can see all the paintings and the book, and it's actually a lot of fun to make a website. That's another
Another adventure.
another big project that takes many hours, I'm sure you know.
I know. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. And I really am delighted that you gave me a copy of this lovely book.
And I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, join me next time when we will have a new guest.